Hey everyone! Tonight we're heading to the year 1307, to a moment when the most powerful military order in medieval Europe vanished overnight, leaving behind whispers of treasure, heresy, and secrets so dangerous that men were burned alive rather than reveal them. So before you settle in, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. The Knights Templar didn't just disappear, they were erased systematically and violently by the very institutions they had served. And the question that has haunted historians for 7 centuries is simple. What did they know? What did they hide? And what went to the grave with them? In 1119, 9 knights made a decision that would reshape medieval Europe. They would become something that shouldn't exist: warrior monks. Christianity had a problem with violence. Killing, even in war, stained the soul. But the Holy Land needed protection, and pilgrims were being slaughtered on roads that supposedly led to salvation. These 9 men approached the King of Jerusalem with the proposal. They would protect Christian pilgrims traveling to sacred sites. They would live as monks, poverty, chastity, obedience, but they would fight as knights. The king gave them headquarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built on the ruins of Solomon's Temple. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. History would call them the Knights Templar. At first, they were barely a footnote. 9 men protecting thousands of miles of road? It seemed absurd. But something changed. Within a decade, the Templars weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Donations poured in: land, money, recruits. Noble families sent their sons. Kings granted them privileges. The Pope himself declared them answerable only to Rome, exempt from local laws, immune to excommunication by bishops. This was extraordinary. The Templars became a state within states, a church within the church, an army that belonged to no king. They wore white mantles marked with a red cross, a uniform that meant one thing. These men did not fear death because they believed dying in service to God guaranteed salvation. But here's where it gets interesting. The Templars didn't just fight, they innovated. They built fortresses that became architectural marvels. They developed military tactics that terrified Muslim armies. And most importantly, they created something medieval Europe had never seen: an international banking system. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land faced a deadly problem. Carrying gold made you a target. The Templars solved this by inventing an early form of checks. You deposited money at a Templar house in Europe, received an encrypted letter, and withdrew your funds in Jerusalem. No gold changed hands, no bandits could rob you, just paper and trust. This system made them rich, staggeringly, impossibly rich. They owned land across Europe, they financed kings, they lent money to the Pope. They built fleets of ships and developed trade networks that connected Europe to the East. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ had become international bankers, and their wealth was growing faster than anyone could track. Military power plus financial control plus religious immunity equals something medieval Europe had no framework to understand. The Templars weren't just an order, they were becoming a power that rivaled kingdoms. And power without accountability makes everyone nervous. The Templars spent their first 9 years doing something strange. Historical records show they barely recruited. They rarely left their headquarters. 9 men, supposedly protecting pilgrims, stayed inside the Temple Mount doing what? Modern archaeological research offers clues. The Temple Mount sits atop layers of history. Solomon's Temple once stood there, destroyed by the Babylonians. The Second Temple rose and fell under Roman hammers. Beneath it all lay tunnels, chambers, storage rooms carved into bedrock, and the Templars had exclusive access for nearly a decade. Some researchers believe they were excavating, not for treasure in the conventional sense, but for something more valuable: knowledge. The temple had been the center of Jewish religious life for 1,000 years. If sacred texts, ritual objects, or historical records survived, they would be there, hidden in chambers sealed when Romans set the city ablaze. This theory explains several oddities. First, the sudden explosion of Templar influence after those initial years. Second, the architectural expertise they displayed. Their fortresses incorporated design elements unknown in Western Europe but common in ancient Middle Eastern construction. Third, the accusations that would later be leveled against them, that they possessed secret knowledge, that they had been corrupted by Eastern heresies, that they no longer believed as Christians should. What could they have found? Some speculate the Ark of the Covenant, though no evidence supports this beyond wishful thinking. Others suggest ancient texts, possibly Gnostic writings, Jewish mystical traditions, or early Christian documents that contradicted church teachings. Still others believe they discovered something architectural: sacred geometry, building techniques, engineering secrets encoded in Solomon's temple. The Templars themselves left no records of what they did during those years. That silence is itself telling. Organizations write about accomplishments, they document victories. The Templars documented nothing about their most formative period. Either nothing happened, or what happened was too sensitive to commit to writing. What we do know is that after those 9 years, the Templars emerged transformed. They weren't just warriors anymore. They were architects, engineers, financiers, and diplomats. They built churches incorporating unusual symbolism. They developed codes and ciphers for communication. They established a hierarchy so secretive that most members never learned what the inner circle knew. Medieval organizations were hierarchical, but they weren't secretive within their own ranks. A monk might not know the abbot's business, but he understood the monastery's purpose. The Templars operated differently. Initiations occurred at night, behind locked doors. Senior members swore oaths that went beyond standard monastic vows, and the ceremony itself became the subject of whispers. Outsiders were forbidden to witness Templar initiations. This wasn't unusual. Many organizations had private rituals. But the Templars took it further. They held these ceremonies in locked churches or fortress chapels. Guards were posted, and when questioned about what transpired, Templars remained silent, citing oaths that bound them to secrecy on pain of death. This combination, sudden wealth, mysterious origins, secret knowledge, and closed rituals, created exactly the environment where suspicion grows. Medieval society ran on visibility. Power needed to be seen to be legitimate. The Templars operated increasingly in shadow, and shadows breed rumors. By the late 1200s, the Templars were everywhere and nowhere. They owned over 9,000 properties across Europe. They operated a financial network that moved money from London to Jerusalem without physical currency crossing borders. Kings and popes borrowed from them. Their fortresses dotted the landscape. Their ships dominated trade routes. Yet they answered to no one except the Pope, and the Pope was increasingly distracted by political struggles. The Templars existed in a legal gray zone, immune to local authority, but loosely supervised from Rome. This made them powerful. It also made them vulnerable. King Philip IV of France watched the Templars with growing resentment. France was broke. Philip had debased the currency, seized Jewish property, and arrested Italian bankers. None of it solved his financial problems. Meanwhile, the Templars sat on enormous wealth, immune to his authority, operating with impunity inside his kingdom. Philip had borrowed heavily from the Templars. He owed them money he couldn't repay. This created a problem. In medieval politics, eliminating your creditor was often simpler than repaying your debt, but the Templars weren't ordinary creditors. They were protected by the Pope, militarily formidable, and internationally connected. Attacking them meant risking war with Rome, rebellion from nobles who supported them, and financial chaos if their banking system collapsed. Philip needed a different strategy. He couldn't simply seize their wealth. He needed moral justification, legal cover, and papal approval. He needed the Templars to be guilty of something so heinous that destroying them became righteous duty rather than naked theft. So Philip waited, and he listened. For years, whispers had circulated about the Templars, their secret initiations, their wealth from unknown sources, their time in the East surrounded by Muslims and heretics, their peculiar churches decorated with symbols that made priests uncomfortable, their increasing independence from church authority. Philip began collecting rumors, turning whispers into accusations, and finding people willing to testify to things they'd never witnessed. The Templars practiced heresy. They spat on the cross in initiations. They worshipped a mysterious head called Baphomet. They engaged in sodomy and dark rituals. They had been corrupted by Muslim influence and no longer believed in Christ. None of this was proven. Most of it was fabricated. But Philip understood something essential about medieval society. Religious accusations were impossible to disprove. How do you prove you don't worship Baphomet? How do you demonstrate you've never spat on the cross in a ceremony no outsider has witnessed? The Templars' secrecy, their shield for 2 centuries, became their vulnerability. Philip brought his accusations to Pope Clement V. Clement was weak, politically dependent on French support, and temperamentally inclined toward compromise. Philip pushed. The Templars were heretics. They corrupted Christianity from within. They endangered souls. Action was required immediately, before they could hide evidence or flee with their wealth. Clement hesitated. The Templars had served the Church faithfully for 2 centuries. They had shed blood defending Christianity. Accusations this severe demanded investigation, not immediate condemnation. Philip responded with pressure, political threats, and public relations. He spread rumors. He had his agents whisper in marketplaces and churches. The Templars are heretics. The Templars worship demons. The Templars endanger your soul. Public opinion began shifting. What had once been admiration curdled into suspicion. The Templars were too rich, too secretive, too powerful. Maybe the rumors were true. Maybe their wealth came from unholy sources. Maybe their secret rituals concealed terrible sins. Philip had achieved something remarkable. He had turned the Templars' greatest strengths, wealth, secrecy, independence, into evidence of guilt. And once suspicion hardened into certainty, the rest became inevitable. Friday, October 13th, 1307. The date would enter history not for what it began, but for how it began. Across France, at dawn, royal officials simultaneously arrested every Knight Templar they could find, coordinated, systematic, and executed with military precision. This wasn't spontaneous. Philippe had planned for months, moving in absolute secrecy. Sealed orders were sent to officials across France with instructions: open on October 12th, execute at dawn on October 13th. No one could warn the Templars, no one could interfere. By the time the sun rose, hundreds of knights were in chains. The arrests targeted everyone: knights, sergeants, chaplains, even servants. Age didn't matter, position didn't matter. If you wore the Templar cross or served their order, you were seized. Properties were occupied, documents were confiscated, assets were frozen. In a single morning, one of medieval Europe's most powerful organizations was decapitated. The Templars were caught completely unprepared. They had grown comfortable, confident in their legal protections and papal immunity. They didn't expect a Christian king to move against them so brazenly. They certainly didn't expect coordination on this scale. Philippe had outmaneuvered them entirely. But arrests were only the beginning. Philippe needed confessions. Accusations without evidence could be challenged, but confessions extracted from the Templars themselves would be irrefutable. So the machinery of medieval justice, torture, began its work. The methods were standard for the era, but no less horrifying. The rack stretched bodies until joints separated. The strappado suspended men by their wrists tied behind their backs, dislocating shoulders. Foot roasting burned souls until flesh separated from bone. Sleep deprivation, starvation, and psychological pressure compounded physical agony. Under this pressure, men confessed to anything. They admitted spitting on the cross. They confirmed worshipping Baphomet, though no two descriptions matched. They confessed to sodomy, to denying Christ, to rituals they couldn't consistently describe. Torture doesn't reveal truth. It produces whatever words stop the pain. Philippe's agents carefully recorded these confessions, documenting heresy in the Templars' own words. That many confessions contradicted each other didn't matter. That tortured men recanted when torture stopped was ignored. Philippe had what he needed: signed statements from Templars admitting guilt. Pope Clement watched in horror. This was his jurisdiction, his authority being trampled. Philippe had arrested members of a religious order answerable only to Rome without papal permission. Clement issued protests, demanding the prisoners be handed over to church authorities. Philippe ignored him. The power dynamic was clear. Clement needed Philippe's political support more than Philippe needed Clement's approval. The Pope could protest, but he couldn't compel. And as confessions piled up, Clement's position weakened. If the Templars truly were guilty, his protests made him complicit in heresy. If they weren't, his weakness was exposed. Either way, he lost. Clement made a calculated decision. He issued a papal bull ordering all Christian monarchs to arrest Templars in their territories and seize their properties. This accomplished two things. First, it gave papal sanction to what Philippe had already done, salvaging some appearance of authority. Second, it spread the arrests beyond France, preventing the Templars from regrouping elsewhere. But Clement added a caveat. The prisoners and their properties should be held for church investigation. Philippe had forced his hand, but the Pope insisted the church would determine guilt. This small assertion of authority went largely ignored. Across Europe, monarchs seized Templar wealth and asked questions later. The speed and coordination of the arrests revealed something important. Philippe had been planning this for months, possibly years. He'd mapped Templar holdings, identified key members, and positioned forces silently. The Templars, despite their intelligence networks and military expertise, detected nothing. This suggests either extraordinary operational security by Philippe or extraordinary complacency by the Templars, probably both. Philippe's administration was surprisingly effective at secrecy, and the Templars had grown comfortable operating in plain sight, confident their papal protection made them untouchable. They were wrong, and by the time they realized it, chains already bound them. The trials began in 1307 and dragged on for years, a grotesque performance where the outcome was predetermined but the spectacle required careful staging. Templar after Templar was brought before church tribunals to repeat confessions extracted under torture. The process wasn't about discovering truth, it was about manufacturing consensus. The charges were spectacular and contradictory. Templars supposedly denied Christ while claiming to serve him. They worshipped idols but built churches. They engaged in heretical rituals while maintaining public piety for 2 centuries. The accusations revealed more about medieval fears than Templar practices. The most persistent charge involved Baphomet, a mysterious head or idol the Templars allegedly worshipped. Descriptions varied wildly. Some said it was a skull. Others described a head with 3 faces. Still others claimed it was a demon in the form of a cat. No physical evidence was ever produced. No 2 witnesses agreed on what Baphomet looked like or where these ceremonies occurred. Modern scholars debate what Baphomet even means. Some suggest it's a corruption of Muhammad, linking Templars to Islam. Others propose it derives from Greek words for baptism of wisdom. Still others argue it never existed, simply a name applied to whatever medieval audiences found frightening. The truth likely lies in the vagueness itself. Baphomet was whatever interrogators needed it to be, a flexible accusation that could absorb any detail, confirm any suspicion, and satisfy any audience. You worship a head? Tell us about it. The answer didn't matter. The question was the point. Sexual accusations followed similar patterns. Templars supposedly kissed each other inappropriately during initiations, engaged in ritual sodomy, and embraced practices the Church condemned. These charges tapped into medieval anxieties about male communities living without women, taking secret oaths and bonding through mysterious rituals. Were such practices real? Possibly in isolated cases, as they were in any medieval institution, but systematic heresy? Unlikely. The Templars had operated openly for 2 centuries, building churches, fighting in the Holy Land, interacting with popes and kings. If they were secret devil worshippers, they were remarkably bad at keeping it secret. What's striking about the trials is how few Templars maintained their confessions when torture stopped. Given the option to affirm their guilt without physical coercion, many recanted. They admitted confessing under duress, stated they had lied to end pain, and denied the charges completely. This created a legal problem. Church law required voluntary confession. Recanting implied torture, which technically the Church opposed. Philippe's solution was brutal. Declare recanting a relapse into heresy, punishable by death. If you confessed under torture and later recanted, you were an obstinate heretic deserving execution. On March 18, 1314, 4 senior Templars were brought before a specially assembled commission in Paris. The plan was simple. They would publicly confirm their confessions, express remorse, and be sentenced to life imprisonment. This would end the affair cleanly, validating Philippe's actions while showing church mercy. Instead, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, did something extraordinary. He recanted. Publicly, in front of assembled clergy and nobles, he declared his confession false, extracted through torture and fear. He stated the Templars were innocent, the accusations lies, and his previous admissions worthless. Geoffrey de Charnay joined him. 2 others maintained their confessions. Chaos erupted. This wasn't in the script. De Molay's recantation threatened everything. If the Grand Master himself declared torture had produced false confessions, the entire proceeding collapsed. Philippe moved quickly. That same day, without further trial or church deliberation, he declared de Molay and Charnay relapsed heretics. They were sentenced to death by burning. As the sun set, stakes were erected on a small island in the Seine. That evening, the 2 men were burned alive in front of a crowd. Witnesses reported they maintained their innocence to the end. Some claimed de Molay issued a curse, summoning Philippe and Clement to meet him before God within a year. Whether he actually said this is disputed. What's not disputed is that both Philippe and Clement were dead within months. Clement died exactly 1 month later, on April 20th, 1314. Philippe died in November, following a stroke. Medieval audiences saw divine judgment. Modern historians see coincidence. But the timing fed legends that persist today. The trials ended not with clear verdicts, but with exhaustion. Many Templars were imprisoned, some executed, others released after years of confinement. The order itself was officially dissolved by papal decree in 1312. Their properties were transferred to other religious orders, though in practice most wealth ended up in royal treasuries. Here's where history gets murky and legends multiply. The Templars didn't vanish overnight. They were systematically dismantled, arrested, tried, and absorbed into other institutions. But the neat narrative of total destruction has problems. First, the arrests were never complete. France caught most Templars within its borders, but other regions were less thorough. In Spain and Portugal, Templars were largely absolved or simply reformed under different names. The Order of Christ in Portugal was essentially the Templars rebranded, keeping the same members, properties, and mission. In Scotland, something stranger occurred. Robert the Bruce, fighting for independence from England, was excommunicated and cared little for papal authority. Scotland became a refuge for fugitive Templars. They arrived with skills, military expertise, administrative experience, financial knowledge that a struggling kingdom desperately needed. Some historians argue Templar refugees helped Bruce win the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, contributing disciplined heavy cavalry that broke English lines. Evidence is thin, but the timing is suggestive. Templars fleeing France in 1307 would have reached Scotland by 1314, and Bruce certainly welcomed any experienced fighters willing to ignore papal excommunication. Then there's the matter of the Templar fleet. The order operated ships throughout the Mediterranean and Atlantic. On the night before the arrests, multiple Templar ships in France disappeared from port. Where they went remains unknown. Some researchers speculate they sailed to Scotland or Portugal. Others suggest they headed west, possibly reaching the Americas. This last theory is controversial and poorly supported, but it's revealing of how little we actually know. The Templars had ships, navigational knowledge, and desperate need to escape. They vanished from historical record. Where they ended up is genuinely uncertain. Financial records present another mystery. The Templars managed enormous wealth, but when their properties were seized, the amounts discovered were far less than expected. Either their wealth was overstated, or significant sums were hidden or transferred before arrests. Some treasure was certainly concealed. Templar fortresses often contained hidden chambers, false walls, and underground passages. When authorities searched these properties, they found administrative records, religious items, and modest amounts of coin. But the legendary Templar wealth, the enormous reserves that financed kingdoms, was largely absent. This created immediate speculation. Had the Templars moved their treasure? Did the missing ships carry wealth away? Or had their financial power always been more about credit and lending than physical gold, making it harder to seize? Modern research suggests the truth is less dramatic. Much Templar wealth existed as land, buildings, and debts owed to them. These were seized successfully. Their liquid assets, actual gold and silver, were probably more modest than legends suggest. Medieval banking was about credit, not hoarding coins. But some genuine mysteries remain. Templar archives disappeared. Documents that should exist, financial records, correspondence, administrative details, vanished. Either they were destroyed systematically or someone removed them before arrests. If the latter, who and why? The most persistent theory involves advance warning. Not everyone was caught on October 13th. Some Templars were traveling, stationed abroad, or simply missed in the sweep. If they warned each other, and if the order had contingency plans, the most valuable items, documents, relics, liquid wealth, could have been hidden or moved. Where might they have gone? Templar properties across Europe included remote fortresses, isolated chapels, and properties in regions hostile to French authority. Concealing items in these locations, especially if friendly locals helped, would be relatively simple. Archaeological evidence occasionally surfaces. Hidden chambers are discovered in former Templar properties. Sometimes they contain nothing. Sometimes they reveal coins, religious items, or architectural details suggesting secret construction. But nothing approaching legendary treasure has ever been confirmed. Beyond treasure, beyond escape routes, the question remains, what did the Templars actually know? What secrets, if any, justified their extreme secrecy? And what knowledge died with them on March 18, 1314? The Templars were builders. Their fortresses and churches incorporated architectural features unusual for the period. Gothic architecture was developing, but Templar constructions sometimes preceded wider innovations. They used advanced engineering, sophisticated geometry, and design elements that suggest access to architectural knowledge not widely available. Some researchers propose they discovered ancient building techniques during their time excavating the Temple Mount. Solomon's temple was legendary for its construction, described in biblical texts with precise measurements and materials. If the Templars found architectural plans, engineering diagrams, or construction manuals, it would explain their sudden expertise. More controversial is the theory that Templars possessed religious texts that contradicted Orthodox Christianity. The early church was diverse, with multiple competing interpretations of Christ's teachings. By the 4th century, orthodoxy was established, and competing texts were suppressed. But copies survived, hidden in libraries, monasteries, and forgotten chambers. If the Templars discovered Gnostic Gospels, alternative narratives of Christ's life, or early Christian writings that presented different theology, it would revolutionize their understanding of Christianity. This might explain accusations of heresy. Not that they worshipped demons, but that they knew Christianity's history was more complicated than the Church admitted. There's circumstantial evidence for this. Templar churches sometimes featured unusual symbolism. Green men, ancient fertility symbols, appeared on columns. Astronomical alignments marked specific dates. Carvings depicted scenes from apocryphal texts not accepted by the Church. Were these decorative choices, or did they encode specific knowledge? Modern research into medieval symbolism suggests both. Medieval churches commonly incorporated older symbols, blending pagan and Christian imagery. But Templars seemed particularly fond of ambiguous iconography, images that could be interpreted multiple ways depending on the viewer's knowledge. The Templars also developed sophisticated codes for communication. Not unusual for a military order, but the complexity suggests something beyond battlefield coordination. Encrypted letters between Templar houses have been discovered. Most deal with administrative matters, but the sophistication implies they could conceal more sensitive information if needed. Then there's the matter of their relationship with Islamic scholarship. Templars spent 2 centuries in the Holy Land, surrounded by Muslim culture at its intellectual peak. Islamic scholars preserved classical knowledge that Europe had lost. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy all flourished in the Islamic world while Europe stagnated. Templars necessarily interacted with Muslim scholars. They negotiated treaties, traded goods, and sometimes formed temporary alliances. In the process, they encountered ideas unavailable in Europe. Algebra, advanced astronomy, medical techniques, philosophical concepts, all potentially learned through contact with Islamic civilization. If Templars brought this knowledge back to Europe, it would explain several things. Their sudden financial sophistication, Islamic banking was more advanced than anything in medieval Europe. Their architectural innovation, Islamic engineering had solved problems European builders still struggled with. Their apparent confidence that contradicted standard Christian teachings. Islamic philosophy had preserved Greek thought that questioned religious certainty. But here's the uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the Templars' secret knowledge was simply cultural openness. They lived in the Holy Land long enough to see Christianity as one tradition among many, Islam as a sophisticated civilization rather than simply the enemy, and religious certainty as less certain than the Church claimed. In medieval Europe, this perspective was incredibly dangerous. Orthodoxy demanded absolute conviction. Questioning doctrine was heresy. Respecting other religions was betrayal. The Templars, if they had absorbed too much Eastern influence, would seem corrupted from a European perspective. This doesn't require actual heresy, just cultural relativism. The quiet knowledge that Christianity wasn't the only path to truth, that other civilizations had wisdom worth learning, that absolute certainty was less absolute than claimed. In the medieval worldview, this realization alone constituted heresy. So when Templars were accused of denying Christ, worshipping strange idols, and practicing secret rituals, perhaps the truth was simpler. They had seen too much, learned too much, and traveled too far to maintain the narrow certainty demanded by medieval Christianity. They didn't worship demons, they just stopped being certain demons existed. This made them dangerous, not because of what they did, but because of what they knew. And knowledge, once it undermines certainty, cannot be allowed to spread. Better to burn it, suppress it, and erase it than let doubt infect the faithful.
700 years after their suppression, the Knights Templar remain deeply embedded in popular culture. Books, movies, conspiracy theories, and legends continue to multiply. Why? What makes this particular medieval organization so enduringly fascinating? Part of it is narrative simplicity. The Templars were powerful, secretive, and suddenly destroyed. That structure, rise, mystery, fall, is inherently compelling. We're wired to find patterns, and the Templar story presents an obvious pattern demanding explanation. But there's something deeper. The Templars represent the collision between idealism and reality. They began with pure intentions, protecting pilgrims, serving God, embodying warrior piety. But success corrupted them, or appeared to. Wealth, power, and secrecy replaced poverty, service, and transparency. This narrative resonates because we've seen it repeatedly. Organizations begin with idealism and calcify into institutions protecting their own power. The Templars are simply an early dramatic example. Their fall suggests that no institution, however righteous its origins, is immune to corruption. Except maybe they weren't actually corrupt. Maybe they were destroyed precisely because they threatened existing power structures. Philip needed their wealth. The church feared their independence. Together, they manufactured accusations that justified destruction. If this interpretation is correct, the Templars represent how easily truth can be weaponized, how accusations need not be proven when power demands someone's destruction. Both narratives coexist in popular imagination. Were the Templars secretly corrupt, their righteousness a mask hiding dark practices? Or were they innocent victims of political conspiracy, destroyed by greed and fear? The evidence supports neither interpretation conclusively, which allows both to persist. Conspiracy theories love this ambiguity. If the Templars were destroyed for knowing too much, what did they know? Every unanswered question becomes evidence of hidden truth. Missing treasure proves conspiracy. Architectural similarities suggest secret knowledge. Coded documents confirm suppressed wisdom. Absence of evidence becomes evidence of absence of evidence, proof that information was deliberately hidden. The reality is almost certainly more mundane. The Templars were a successful military order that became too wealthy and independent. A king in debt saw opportunity. A weak pope couldn't resist. Torture produced false confessions, and an organization that had served Christianity for 2 centuries was dismantled to settle debts and assert authority. But mundane explanations don't inspire novels, films, or endless speculation. The mystery is more compelling than the truth. And as long as questions remain unanswered, where did the treasure go? What did they find beneath the temple? What knowledge died with de Molay? The Templars will remain symbols of hidden wisdom, lost secrets, and truths too dangerous to speak. Perhaps that's the real legacy. Not what the Templars knew, but what we wish they knew. Not what they hid, but what we want to believe was hidden. The Knights Templar have become mirrors reflecting our fascination with mystery itself. They took their secrets to their graves, but those graves refused to stay silent. 7 centuries later, we're still listening, still wondering, still digging. And maybe that's exactly what keeps history alive. The questions that refuse to be answered, the mysteries that resist solution, the knowledge that no matter how much we learn, something always remains just beyond reach. The Knights Templar didn't just take secrets to their graves. They took our certainty that we could ever fully know the past. And perhaps that's the most valuable secret of all. The knowledge that some things resist knowing, some truths evade capture, and some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Not because they're supernatural or magical, but because history doesn't offer neat conclusions. It offers fragments, contradictions, and silence. The Templars disappeared into that silence 700 years ago. We've been trying to make them speak ever since.
The Knights Templar rose from nothing, became everything, and vanished almost overnight. What they knew, what they found, and what they protected remains debated. Were they heretics or victims? Treasure hunters or faithful servants? Keepers of ancient wisdom or simply successful warriors who made powerful enemies? History gives us fragments. Legends give us narratives. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between, complex, contradictory, and resistant to simple explanation. The Templars took their final secrets to their graves, but those secrets live on in every question we ask, every theory we propose, every excavation that searches for what was hidden. Perhaps that's the point. The mystery isn't what they hid, it's why we keep searching. And as long as we search, the Knights Templar remain exactly what they were in life. Impossible to ignore, difficult to understand, and absolutely unforgettable.